Jomo Kenyatta's wealth began to grow, mostly through acquisition of large tracts of land previously owned by European settlers.
Around about the time of independence, the British government and the World Bank created a fund which they called the Settlement Transfer Scheme. This scheme was so abused because whereas it was supposed to benefit black people, Kenyans, to possess what was then owned by the white settlers, it was abused by politicians and wealthy people to the extent, and with all due respect, this is a historical fact, it is documented, it is even in the Forbes magazine typifying the richest people of this country. And because of that, the Kenyatta family ended up owning 500,000 acres of land. Because of that abuse of this World Bank British government funded program. Now, subsequent politicians, when they have come into power, they have looked at that and said, if one family then used that opportunity to unjustifiably get land for themselves, people have looked at political power as an opportunity to acquire tracts of land, of public land.
Dear fellow Kenyans, we must reject politicians who seek power only to protect their ill-gotten wealth. These leaders do not have our best interest at heart. They come to us during elections with handouts and promises, but their true goal is to maintain the corrupt systems that benefit them while the rest of us suffer. Our hospitals remain underfunded, our children lack proper education, our roads remain unfinished. All because of their greed. Let's refuse to accept their money or vote for them. Kenya deserves leaders who will serve the people, not their pockets. The power to change our country and our future is in our hands. The story of the Kenyatta family, from the founding president to his son, is one that has been marked by immense wealth, political power, and controversial legacy of corruption and greed. For decades, the Kenyatta name has been synonymously used to represent privilege, influence in Kenya, but behind this very polished image lies a troubling history of land grabbing, economic mismanagement, and financial secrecy that is alleged to have caused a lot of harm to millions of ordinary Kenyans. It all began with Jomo Kenyatta, Kenya's first president, who played a significant role in leading the country to independence in 1963. Jomo's rise to power was also the beginning of a very long history of land grabbing. During his tenure, Jomo Kenyatta and his close allies amassed vast tracts of land that were originally intended to be redistributed to poor Kenyans. After independence, the British colonial government provided a fund for buying back land from the settlers, intending to return it to the displaced local population. Instead, much of this land ended up in the hands of Jomo Kenyatta and his inner circle. It is estimated that Kenyatta's family control hundreds of thousands of acres across the country, including prime agricultural land that could have been used to settle landless Kenyans. This land grab not only entrenched inequality in our country, but it became the foundation of Kenyatta's vast wealth.
The fruit of the work that this team and others have done.
President Uhuru Kenyatta receives a 5-volume report by the Truth, Justice and Reconciliation Commission, a report that drew mixed reactions and one that is now being termed as incomplete by 3 of 8 commissioners. Reason being that according to them, Chapter 2B on land excluded significant portions of sworn testimonies. Sections they say were removed as a result of political pressure that was brought to bear ostensibly to protect the reputation of the first president and, by extension, his family. In a statement to Newsroom's Professor Robert Sile details the excerpts removed. Section 203, for example, reads in part, and I quote, "The President, Jomo Kenyatta in this case, grabbed what should have been public or communal land and dished it to relatives. A case in point involves the President himself. When Kenyatta's son, Muingai, married Isaiah Madenga's daughter in 1976, Kenyatta's wedding gift was a large tract of government land which was apparently acquired without official approval and without compliance with legal procedures." End quote. Another section details how, after independence, President Jomo Kenyatta allegedly unlawfully alienated 250 acres of land to himself at the coast, especially portions of the beach, demanding that, quote, "local communities that should have benefited from the trust lands accept payment of 600 shillings per acre. When the locals declined to accept the money, he told them that whether or not they accepted it, the remainder of the trust lands would go to the government." End quote. And section 261 that says, quote, "Since Kenyatta's administration, settlement schemes at the coast have been fraught with irregularities, outright discrimination of landless coastal communities, settlement of mainly one upcountry community on coastal communities' lands, land grabbing by high and low-ranking officials, and fraud." End quote.
Fast forward to Uhuru Kenyatta. Jomo Kenyatta's son, who became Kenya's president in 2013, his presidency was marred by rampant borrowing, which has left Kenyans struggling with crippling debt. Uhuru's government borrowed billions of dollars from international lenders, including China, IMF, World Bank, under the guise of financing very large infrastructure projects that now we are realizing for Morara that they were never finished. But the most prominent example is the Standard Railway Gauge that was funded by China, a project that cost 320 billion and was heavily funded by Chinese loans. This is much more than it would have really cost this project. Similar countries that have done similar projects include Ethiopia, Tanzania, whose cost is much lower. While the government touted this project as drivers of economic growth, there is very little that has been generated so far, and this has really brought down the economy of Kenya because the promised returns from the loans that were heavily borrowed has not really been realized.
So to those who say that we are overborrowing, I tell them the only reason you should be concerned about the level of borrowing is if that borrowing was being used and utilized for consumption or for recurrent expenditure. But if that borrowing was going to investment, such as the rail, such as our roads, water and health, things that are going to have a positive impact on the country as a whole in future and enable our overall economy to grow even further.
Our President Uhuru Kenyatta amesema
2 billion.
2 billion every day. He has said it. Every day. 2 billion
inapotea, bwana usifunga hapo na useme huyu ndiye anaiba hii 2 billion.
Can you what do you want Kenyans to do when you are saying 2 billion is being stolen every day?
Wewe ni Kenya 1. Wewe ndio mndosi Kenya 1. Halafu naambia wale wanyonge wengine 2 billion inaibiwa kila siku. Surely.
You have the machinery, you have prosecution, uko na CID, lakini unakuta yule mtu hana chochote anakimbizwa kama swara.
Under Uhuru's leadership, Kenya's debt to GDP ratio ballooned, with public debt increasing to trillions of money, which by the time his presidency ended in 2022, it was 9 trillion Kenya shillings. The impact of this overborrowing has been so devastating. Kenya is now in a debt trap where a significant portion of the country's revenue is spent on servicing loans, leaving very little room for essential services like education, healthcare, and social welfare programs that could improve the life of Kenyans. Hospitals are underfunded, while medical workers striking While medical workers are also striking, teachers are striking over unpaid salaries, and schools lack basic infrastructure. All while the government struggles to manage while the government of Ruto struggles to manage these overwhelming debt obligations. Many Kenyans have really questioned the issue of escalated debt that has never been put in public, who we owe and how much we owe them. But some people argue that these loans are not just for national development, but were also used to enrich those in power. And this is a statement that was made by Wajigi, including Uhuru's close allies. A similar situation that, like the one the father did by allowing his close allies to benefit from land grabbing. Allegations have also surfaced that contracts for major infrastructure projects were inflated and awarded to companies with ties to powerful individuals, allowing them to siphon off huge sums of money while the rest of the public bore the brunt of repaying, while the rest of us, let me say so, bear the public brunt of paying these very, very loans.
Tayari umesikia leo mwaka huu pesa ambayo tutatumia ya Kenya ya kulipa madeni ni trilioni 1 ya kulipa madeni.
Over the recent years, there has been growing concern that Uhuru Kenyatta's aggressive borrowing and economic mismanagement was going to land us into a problem. But this was just part of a broader strategy to protect his family's vast wealth. Why then would Uhuru want to be in power? He didn't really do much to improve the livelihoods of Kenyans. He did things that could affect Kenyans for years to come. Why was he so much interested in becoming the president of Kenya? What was his agenda? Now, recently, the Kenyatta family, which has already had significant resources, has been accused of hiding their wealth through untraceable networks, including offshore accounts in tax havens like in Panama. In 2021, the Pandora Papers, a major investigative report, revealed how the Kenyatta family has used offshore companies to hide millions of dollars in secret, complicated network of accounts. These companies, some registered in Panama, others in British Virgin Islands, were used to conceal assets and shield the family's wealth from public scrutiny.
But confidential documents exposing a network of secretive offshore companies belonging to members of the Kenyatta family now cast this legacy in new light. The global leak is called the Pandora Papers. The Pandora Papers detail ownership of an expensive home in an exclusive UK neighborhood and an investment portfolio belonging to one of them over $30 million.
All of this is happening while ordinary Kenyans are struggling under weight of very heavy taxes, rising cost of living, and stagnant wages. But you know what? There are those Kenyans that believe that family requires their polished image requires to be protected.
Why I'd vote for you as a leader, if it was even something like for a president, is that you already have a wealthy background, so you see no need to steal. You're already born into power.
But for those suffering Kenyans that don't believe that, they need to think twice, because the Kenyatta family has quietly been accumulating more wealth and more wealth in these offshore structures. The financial secrecy has not only allowed the family to avoid paying taxes on much of their fortune, taxes that we could have used to pay the loans he overborrowed, but has also made it difficult for authority to trace the origin of their wealth. So as we sit and wait for this to pay these loans, increasing taxes for the middle class that is barely managing their debts, there are people hiding their wealth somewhere.
The investigation has not found any evidence to suggest corruption relating to the first family. What it has found is a trove of documents showing that members of the family have used offshore locations for at least 10 years.
These revelations, of course, that were made in 2021 were not accepted. They sparked an outrage, and these so many people, so many people still protecting the Kenyatta family. So actually, the Kenyatta's family behavior was seen by some people as betrayal of public trust, but still, they have the wealth.
Kenyattas are a very wealthy family with wealth that stretches into the hundreds of millions of dollars and spans numerous sectors of Kenya's economy.
And as Kenyans are suffering, they remain silent. They say they stand with Kenyans, but they actually caused a problem that we cannot solve. While Uhuru Kenyatta positioned himself as a reformer and an anti-corruption crusader during his presidency, these offshore dealings suggest that his true priority, the amount of corruption and the money that never reached in form of loans in the country, he was actually having his own interest. He was protecting his family interest, let's say so. Kenyans have always wondered why many cabinet secretaries who really don't need these jobs actually take these jobs. But a good number of them, they need this power to protect their wealth. The wealth that a lot of people are not sure how they got it anyway. Furthermore, critics argue that Uhuru Kenyatta has used his political power not to serve the people of Kenya, but to safeguard his family ill-gotten wealth. Throughout his presidency, Uhuru was reluctant to address issues of land grabbing and land redistribution by his father or take even a meaningful step towards land reform. Now we are realizing most of this land that is assumed probably to have been taken, we are not sure, but like we said, in Laikipia County, almost half of the county belongs to almost, I think, 3 families. I think I saw a conversation around that in Lynn Ngugi's show. But anyway, we don't know who really are those families. I'm not trying to say it is Kenyatta family, but it's just one example. He also remained silent on the issue of his family's offshore wealth. During the time of the Pandora revelations, he never spoke about that. Even as the public anger grew, he was silent. Instead, his government pursued policies that seemed to prioritize the interests of the elite, including the Kenyatta family at the expense of ordinary citizens. All this money that we are realizing from the projects that are said to have been started at some point and were never completed, this is something that Uhuru could have done right by Kenyans to correct some of the mistakes that the father did. Instead, he went into a borrowing spree, projects that were never completed, and Kenyans cannot trace where the money is. Loans that they borrowed, they don't want to show Kenyans what the loans were all about. He even borrowed to the extent that he borrowed outside the law. Anyway, as the Kenyatta family continue to enjoy their wealth and influence, Kenya's economy is teetering on the edge of collapse. The debt burden has left the country vulnerable to external pressure, with some fearing the vital national assets. Like, let's say, for example, at the time, there was a fear that maybe Mombasa port could be seized if we are not in a position to pay our loans, or maybe a default could cause a lot more damage to the economy than it is today. But anyway, millions of Kenyans continue to struggle with poverty and unemployment and lack access to basic facilities. The wealth inequality in the country, much of it which is rooted in land grabbing, legacy by Kenyatta family, has grown wider. It is clear that Uhuru Kenyatta should not be really hailed as a hero. He is a champion of as a hero or a champion of Kenya's progress. His presidency was marked by economic mismanagement, over-borrowing, a failure to tackle corruption that has plagued Kenyans for decades. While he may present himself as a statesman, his actions suggest that his true priority was never to support these vulnerable Kenyans. It was much more to protect his wealth and the privilege of his family. As Kenyatta's family offshore dealings come to light, which came to light in 2021, it became clear to everyone that the wealthy do not actually keep their assets in Kenya, they keep them somewhere else. Hidden accounts that probably our Kenyans, no matter which generation comes in, may never trace it. So the only thing that we can do is to avoid these people. I have seen a lot of people trying to drive the idea that, the shift of power, because it's the narrative that we drive in these platforms. We drive a narrative, it's probably Kenyatta, Uhuru is on this side, Uhuru is on that side. We should stop it, because these people never have the interest of Kenyans, poor Kenyans, in their heart. They don't like accountability, but they like to hold power. They perpetuate only inequality and do what is good for themselves and the people around them so that they can protect their future. These leaders never stay out of political power because they always want to determine who becomes what in Kenya for the sake of their own interests. You see, when you get something that is not really legal, you will always want to have somebody that can help you protect it so that someone will not take it away. But you know what? Kenyans should be much wiser now.